Right, let's look at the aggregation of marginal gains. So what is the aggregation of marginal gains? Tiny improvements over time compound to create huge, almost impossible improvements. So to demonstrate this principle, I'm going to get you to do a 4th grade math problem. And I'm hopefully going to insult your intelligence a little bit here by asking you to do some simple math. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a penny. And I want you to imagine that every day we're going to double this penny. So day 1, 1 penny, day 2, 2 pennies, day 3, 4, and on it goes. So I want you to think, if we were to double this for 10 days, the amount of money that you would end up with at the end of it, would you prefer that? Or would you prefer that I just give you 10 bucks? If you said you would take $10, well done. That is the amount of money you would end up with after 10 days if you just doubled a penny. So let's try again. Would you prefer to double a penny for 30 days, or would you prefer $1,000 in cash? So have a think about that. And the answer is, if you said $1,000, you've just lost out on almost $21.5 million. Unbelievably, you double a penny for 30 days. That's how much money you end up with. So let's take this to ridiculous levels now. Double a penny for 90 days. Or I'll write you a check right now for $1 billion with a B, billion. Now I want you to think about this. I don't want you to jump into this. I want you really, truly to have a think. Double for 90 days or walk away with $1 billion. Have a good think. And 3, 2, 1. If you said $1 billion, you lose. If you doubled a penny for 90 days, you would be the richest person that has ever existed in history and is richer than every single person up until that point combined, and you'd then still have money left over. In case you're interested, 24 zeros equals a septillion. Huge number. So this demonstrates what happens if you double something as simple as a penny and you do it over enough time. This is what happens with it. So where did this come from, the aggregation of marginal gains? Well, this smiling bald chap here is Dave Brailsford. And he was the British cycling coach. And he led the British cycling team to 10 gold medals at the Beijing Olympics in 2008. Now, that doesn't sound like that great. Wow, well done. Yeah, 10 gold medals, so what? Up until that point, let's go back a step. So victory at the Olympics. So Dave had decided that, having sat down, looked at all the data, looked at everything that was going on, seen what the cyclists were doing, he worked out that if they just made a 1% improvement in everything that they did, then they would win the Olympics. Now that seems like a pretty bold statement and a big call, but that's exactly what he did. In 2008, the reason this was such a big deal, prior to the Beijing Olympics, British cycling was abysmal. It was so bad that some of the cycling manufacturing teams, some of the companies that produced bicycles and clothing, etc., they refused to let the British cycling team wear it because they were so worried about the reputational damage it would have for their brand that they were being used by such a bad team. So the total wins in 2008 stood at 1 gold Olympic medal since 1908 and no Tour de France wins. Dave took over, he looked at everything, and then within a 9-year period, nobody could touch the British team. Nobody. Any team in the world just could not get close. In that 9-year period, they went on to 5 Tour de France wins. That was over 6 years. 66 gold Olympic medals and 178 World Championship wins. Pretty impressive, and it is seen as one of the greatest comebacks in sporting history. All caused by Dave Brailsford. So, if you look at this graph, this kind of explains it graphically what happens if you take tiny little improvements and you compound it over enough time. And this is kind of the penny example that I used earlier on. Now, if we look at this from a business point of view, most businesses sit somewhere in the middle. Businesses that really improve on things, they will be more towards the blue line, and those that get worse over time will sit on the red line. And for those that are more numerically based in their head, if you get 1% better every day, you end up with that green number there, 0.78. If you get 1% worse every day, you end up with this teeny tiny little number. The graph there demonstrates it as well. Interestingly, if you want to learn more about Dave Brailsford and the British cycling team, jamesclear.com. He has written a book about lots of things like this, and one of the stories in there is about the British cycling team. Well worth a read. So, Dave Brailsford said, and I'll paraphrase this, if you improve in every area by just 1%, magic happens. And this meant that they weren't just focusing on the big stuff, it was all the little things like sleep, nutrition, how everyone was dealing with each other, making sure that they were getting to bed nice and early, morale, making sure that the areas they were walking on the bike was nice and clean so they could see any damage really easily. Stuff like this. What he basically wanted to emphasise that it wasn't just the time on the bike, it was everything else as well that made all the difference. So the key takeaway, one action may create a great result. However, many actions over a long enough time period will dramatically and quickly create huge positive improvement. So the one thing that Dave had said that was going to make all the difference was identify areas for improvement and focus on them one at a time. So let's break this down. How do we actually change a process to improve the efficiency? So if we look at the cycling team as an example, we look at something simple like their bikes. There are loads of areas that they could focus on there. Now, not everything was going to make a difference, but what they did is they looked at each of these areas in turn, and then what they did was, does this directly contribute to increasing speed, reducing times, less fatigue, whatever it was that they were using for their metrics to measure it, was it actually directly contributing to it? From a business point of view, that could be things like turnover, profit, average customer value, amount of leads that you're getting in, the amount of money saved on waste, whatever it is. And then, does it improve efficiencies regarding cost, time, manpower, or resources? Well, small differences actually move the needle. There are some things that no matter how often you do them or how much you do it, it's not actually going to move the needle in any way, shape, or form. It's not going to make a blind bit of difference whether their bicycles were red or they were blue. That's one of those things. It doesn't matter. You can put 20 different colours of paint on there. It will not make a bike go faster. And is it feasible to actually affect this area? There are some things that no matter what you do, you can't affect this area. You can't affect the area. As an example with the bikes, if they've got carbon fibre bikes, there's nothing they can really do about chemistry. If that's the strongest and lightest material known to man, then that's the strongest, lightest material known to man. There's not really much more they can do with that. So there's no point focusing on it. But what they did realise is that there was something called critical success factors. And what they decided when they looked at all the data and when they looked at everything that they could focus on, they realised that there were some things that were worth focusing on more than others. And these were known as the critical success factors. And then what you do is you work on the marginal gains for those areas only, nothing else. And the reason being is, if you try to focus on everything, you're focusing on nothing. You have to just drill this into where you're going to get the most momentum and the most change in the quickest period of time. So this ties in well with the 80-20 rule, which is a Pareto principle, which stipulates that 80% of your effort will only give you 20% of your output. Flip side of that is 20% of the input for certain things will give you 80% of the output. If you do this on the right side of the equation, it becomes 16 times more efficient. And this is exactly what critical success factors focuses on. It's the things that will move the needle the most and in the quickest time frame. And one thing that they realised very quickly was some of the critical success factors just were not sexy. Things like sleep more, proper nutrition, make sure you go to the toilet before you go cycling. Silly things like that that are just not sexy, but they do move the needle. And unfortunately, those are the things that people slip up on the most because they are boring. They are dull. They're not fun necessarily. So focus on the sexy things, sure, but also make sure that you're focusing on the non-sexy things if they are a critical success factor and they move the needle. So analyze the potential impact before taking action. Basically, is the juice worth the squeezing? So the easiest way to do this is work out the math of your proposed changes. What will the benefit be in measurable terms? For cycling, quite easy. If the split time was 1 minute, if they could get that down to 59 seconds, that's an improvement. That's easily measurable. And you need to find ways to do the same. And then what will success look like? How will we know when we've achieved what we've tried to achieve? So that could be things that are measurable, such as time, money, amount of employees, key performance indicators improving, less waste. Basically, you have to work out how you're going to measure it and what that would look like. How will you know when you've succeeded? And then work out a best case and a worst case scenario. And by worst case, I don't mean it doesn't work. I mean, if you were to be really conservative about the gains that you will get on something, where would that sit? And then best case, if everything went exactly as you wanted to, where would that be? Normally, you're somewhere in the middle. And then it's working out if the juice is going to be worth the squeezing. If it is, get squeezing, people. Don't hang around. No, then perhaps it's time to look at other options. That might not actually be a critical success factor after all. If you can't measure it, you can't actually do something about it and see if there's change. The next thing you have to do then, if you want to do this, then you have to allocate resources to those critical success factors to make sure it does work. Now that image doesn't make a lot of sense. Hold that thought. You've got to allocate the required resources, whether that's money, manpower, time, hardware, raw materials, 101 other things that could be in there. You know your own business, you know what you're looking for, what works, what doesn't. You'll know what resources you need to ensure that success. And then the next thing you've got to do is track the data. There's no point doing all this and just sort of, it looks like it's working. You have to track the data and be meticulous about this, because that is the only way that you're going to know if this is actually working. That old phrase, what gets tracked gets managed. If you're not tracking it, you can't manage it. If you can't manage it, you can't see if it's working, and then you don't know if you're going to get success at the end of it. Without data, quite simply, you're not going to know if you're actually hitting the goals that you set out. So you need that data. And we do that by creating a culture. And I've very deliberately changed this to cult your. You want this to almost be like a cult in everything that you do, where people are fanatical about making changes, marginal gains. This starts from the top. So with you as a business owner, you have to live and breathe this. People have to look to you to see that you're doing this day in, day out, and that this is important. I've been involved in things before in the past similar to this, where the management haven't been invested in it, and they've been told to do it, but they don't actually care. And these things fail. And not because it didn't work, but because management weren't supervising it or weren't making sure that it keeps going. And to create that culture, you have to engender a culture of marginal gains in everything that you're doing. Every area of your business, get everybody invested in it, and make sure that this becomes something that is completely part of your company culture. To do that, lay out some very clear guidelines that are simple, easy to understand, and more importantly, the expectations of every single member of your staff, so that they know exactly what they're meant to be doing and not doing, so that they know if they're hitting the goals, they know what goals are there to be set, and more importantly, you can go back and say, hi, this is what we said needs to happen, it isn't happening now, we need to get this changed. And one of the easiest ways to build a culture, or a culture, is to give staff ownership of their own individual part of the process. If they own that process, it becomes their baby, and they want to improve. They want to do well. And that feeds in to the live, eat, breathe improvement in everything that you do. If they've got ownership, everybody's invested in this, then make sure that you're tracking the progress and put it for everybody to see on some kind of dashboard, whether it's an email, whether it's a spreadsheet, whatever it is that you've got to track this. And what that will do is you will see magic slowly start to happen, because everybody will start to compete because they all want to do well. Nobody wants to be that guy that's getting nowhere. But more importantly, what you will find is each area will help other functional areas of the business as they identify things that people that are living in that part of the business might not necessarily have seen. everybody then has a say in how this works, and you will see magic happen. So key takeaway, identify your critical success factors, allocate resources to improve them, track the data so you can see the progress, and then create a cult year surrounding everything to do with improvement and the aggregation of marginal gains, and you will see magic happen. So final slide then, action point for you moving forward from today. Create a really simple Google Sheet or Excel to track your progress, and start with that. And all you want to do is put in all the areas where you think. So put the functional areas of each area of your business. So it might be like operations, sales, fulfillment, whatever it is, your key functional areas of the business. Put those in. Then identify all the areas that you think could possibly be an area for improvement. Then subdivide that again on the next tab of how you're going to do this. Find out if it's actually going to move the needle and it's going to work. Then on the next tab, you can identify your critical success factors. And within that, you can then put what you're actually going to measure. How will you know success is going to happen? And then on the last tab, you can have all the success metrics about how it's been tracked over time, so you can see the improvement. You can make pretty graphs, and you can see it there for everybody. They can then look at it and see what's working and what's not. And when you engender that cult year and everyone can see it, that is when you will see huge changes. So hopefully that's been worthwhile. Hopefully this all makes sense. Let me know how you got on. If you get any points, questions, then let me know.